Hi everyone, this video is on the subject of meditation, spiritual practice and your daily schedule. The reason why I'd like to make a video on this subject is that really having a daily schedule serves two primary purposes traditionally for meditation, yoga sadhana, spiritual practice. And so let's just talk about those first. So the first one is that it's very much traditionally understood that for your meditation to bear fruit, for your meditation and spiritual practice to be effective, you want to be engaged in it regularly and over a long period of time without interruption. So you want to be able to do it every day, regularly, and not have periods of time where you're not practicing and interruptions and irregularities. So having a daily schedule really makes that possible. At least in my experience, without a daily schedule, it's very difficult to maintain that kind of thing. So really having a daily schedule is one of the essential things for your meditation practice to really prosper and to be effective. The second reason is a little bit less of an obvious one. Second reason is really that by making a daily schedule and following it, you're really doing a kind of practice, spiritual practice in itself. Now it's not a meditation practice specifically, but it's a practice of developing and increasing your power of resolve, or what in yoga is called your sankalpa shakti. So actually developing and strengthening your sankalpa shakti is one of the more important aspects of most facets of yoga practice. Many of the yoga practices are undertaken really to do just this, to strengthen and develop your natural, innate power of resolve called sankalpa shakti. So when you make a schedule for yourself and then you set about following it, keeping your resolve, then what you're doing is, just by doing that, regardless of even what your practice is doing itself, just by following the schedule, you're strengthening your sankalpa shakti, your power of resolve. So having a daily schedule for yourself and following it is really a practice in itself, which will then strengthen and empower your meditation. So it's your sankalpa shakti that really in your meditation will allow your conscious awareness to pierce through the layers of unconsciousness, the layers of tamas, darkness in your meditation, to come to deeper and deeper meditative experiences, and ultimately to go through that process of self-realization, which is what yoga is really about. So having a daily schedule, following your daily schedule, you're strengthening that power which you're then using in your meditation to go through the layers of the unconscious mind. Okay, so first most important point for creating a daily schedule for your meditation and for your spiritual practices is start small. Whenever you're doing any kind of practice for developing your sankalpa shakti, what you want to do is don't give yourself a bar that is too high to jump over from the very beginning, right? So think about it like you're training yourself in athletics. It's just like how an athlete trains themselves. You're not training your muscles, you're not training your physical body, you're training your power of resolve, but the same principles apply. So an athlete trying to train themselves for the high jump isn't going to start by putting the bar at 4 meters, right? And then trying to jump over that, which they know with all enthusiasm taken into account, they know that they're not going to be able to do on the first try. So don't set the bar too high for yourself to start with. Don't tell yourself, I'm going to practice for 14 hours a day. I'm going to do my meditation all night and then go and work in my busy job and then come home and meditate all night. So be realistic and make a plan that you know you can follow. In fact, make a plan from the beginning. Make a plan that you think is easy. It's going to be no problem at all, absolutely easy to follow. And then follow it. That way you're not training yourself to fail. Now, that's not saying that failure is bad or failure is unnecessary. Failure is a necessary experience in the process of training yourself. You can't succeed in any endeavor without failing multiple times, picking yourself back up again and carrying on and trying again. Just like in athletics, you'll jump, try and clear the bar, you'll fall, and so when you fail, when you don't clear the bar that you've set for yourself, what do? You have some options. You can lie on the ground and berate yourself and kick up dust and say, I'm no good, I'm a failure, or you can pick yourself up, dust yourself off, and try again, carry on. If you think, no, I really should be able to clear that bar, I know I have the capacity to do it, leave it where it is. If you think, no, it was too high, actually I was a little bit too ambitious, lower it a tiny bit, try again. So use that same principle with yourself when setting up your daily schedule for your practice. So do, in your schedule, prepare for yourself from the beginning, from the early stage, something that you're sure you'll be able to follow, and then watch yourself succeed. And by making the resolve, I will do such and such. I've made this schedule, I've made the times of my schedule, I've made the details of my schedule, I resolve to follow this, I resolve to do it, and then watch yourself carry on and do it. Watch yourself carry through with that resolve and enjoy that experience. And in that experience, your power of resolve is getting strengthened, is getting increased. Okay, so then over time, what you can do, once following that routine, following that schedule is just so easy and natural for you, then you can slowly expand it. And what you'll probably find is that as you get more and more into your meditation, as you get more into your spiritual practice, you'll get more inspired and you'll be enjoying it so much that you'll just naturally set aside more time for that. So when you feel that inclination, that natural inclination that this is going really well, I want to commit a little bit more time, add a tiny bit more, raise the bar a tiny bit more, resolve to follow it, and then follow it. And when something happens in life, you fall down, an obstacle comes, disturbs your progress, disturbs your momentum, it will happen many times. It's part of life. And when you are not able to follow your schedule, then get up, dust yourself off, next day, try again, keep going. Okay, and that as well is one of the elements of developing and building your Sankalpa Shakti, the possibility to fail and let go of that failure. Forgive yourself and pick yourself up and move on and try again and keep going. Okay, so don't be too ambitious to start. Start small and slowly increase. Okay, so now when you're starting small, one of the things that I've found in the past is that it's very useful to actually write your schedule down. Try and be specific with times. Being specific with times is very helpful to give your mind boundaries. And then having been specific with times in your schedule, don't be late. Don't procrastinate. Don't say, I'll just go 5 minutes later. Try to be on time. Make that a clear and precise boundary in your mind. And so then when it comes to writing your schedule down, one of the helpful things about that is that the mind can be very tricky. At least from my experience in my own practice, if I imagine a schedule, place it in my mind, don't write it down, and then the time comes, the mind will start playing games. The mind will start arguing and presenting excuses and doubting whether I remember the schedule correctly. If it's written down, I can take that piece of paper and say to my mind, okay, here, look, it's very clear. No argument needed. It's all written down very clearly. So if you want to help yourself, write it down very clearly. Shouldn't be complicated. Bullet points, precise times, precise few details, and use that. Put it up somewhere. Put it up in your bedroom, put it up in your office, wherever you're going to see it when you need to see it. Okay. So then, of course, when it comes to specific times, then it's very helpful to make the schedule for a time that fits into your life. So you have to fit your meditation, your spiritual practice, your sadhana into your life. You have to fit it around your work, around your family duties, and everything else. So pick a time where you know that you're not going to be disturbed, where you know that you're not going to be needing to fulfill some of your necessary duties, and make that your central time for your daily practice. Now, what I usually recommend to people when talking one-on-one about developing a practice schedule, and this really comes from the tradition of my master, is that if you're going to develop a practice schedule, make the center of your practice a one specific time in the day to sit for meditation, right? So if you make that the center, if you make that the hub of the wheel of your practice, every day I will sit for meditation at this precise time for however long you can, whether it's for 1 hour, whether it's for half an hour, 20 minutes, 10 minutes, 5 minutes even. If you maintain that sitting for your meditation at the same time every day, that gives an anchor to your practice. That gives the hub of the wheel to your practice, and there you can build. So for that, identify in your life, with your specific work, family duties, and everything else, identify one time in the day, whether it's early in the morning, whether it's late in the evening, whenever it is, that you know you're not going to have to do anything else. You're not going to be disturbed, and make that your meditation time. And then make that the center of your sankalpa also for practice. Make sure that you're there on time and that you're sitting for your meditation. So then from there, you build your practice around that. So when it comes to spiritual practice, you can break up most practices into some basic categories. So you have meditation practices, the internal practices such as meditation, japa, and silent prayer. That's one category of practice. Then you have breathing practices, which are supports and instruments to empower your meditation. It's another category. Then you have physical practices, so practicing with your body to strengthen your body, remove obstacles from your body that are disturbing your internal practices like meditation, etc. Then in yoga, you also have subtle body practices, or sometimes called pratyahara practices. So those are the main categories of practices for your specific practice time. So internal practices, meditation, japa, silent prayer, then pranayama practices, physical practices, and pratyahara, subtle body practices. These are main categories of practice that can be implemented in that specific practice time. And then you have your practices which you're doing the rest of the time in your relationships and in daily life, right? Practicing the yamas and niyamas, practicing non-violence, practicing truth, etc. So for the purpose of this video, let's talk about the practices that you're going to be engaged in for the specific time that you've set aside for yourself, for your daily schedule, right? So in my experience, it can be particularly helpful to sequence your practices in a certain order, in a certain way, which causes them to flow very naturally one after the other and causes them to lead one into the other to ultimately lead you into a deeper and more beautiful experience of meditation. So that would be the very traditional what is very traditional in the yoga tradition. It's outlined in the Hatha Yoga Pradipika specifically, which is starting with physical practices. So those can be physical yoga practices or physical practices from any meditative tradition that utilizes the physical body as an instrument for practice. So you go into your physical practices first, then following physical practices, relaxations and subtle body pratyahara practices, right, such as the systematic relaxations and the progressions towards yoga nidra and the practices of yoga nidra in the yoga tradition. Following those relaxation practices, then breathing practices, pranayama practices, where you sit up in your meditation posture and use your breath as an instrument to direct your mind. And then finally, the meditation, japa, and practices of silent prayer, which are all together in the final category. So if you sequence your practices like that, physical practices, deep relaxation and pratyahara practices, breathing practices, meditation practices, it becomes a very natural, very cohesive flow of practice from one level of your personality to another, to another, to another, which ultimately helps you to finally come to a very beautiful, deeply relaxed, deeply centered state of body, breath, and mind, so that when you try to come to that deepest experience of meditation that you're able to come to, it happens much more easily. It happens much more spontaneously. Okay, so that's something that has been very helpful for me in my experience of practice, setting myself a schedule where I look at the different kinds of practice that I want to engage in, sequence them in a way that makes sense, that's conducive to the entire practice as a whole, and then give specific amounts of time for each one. Right? So this much time for my physical practices, this much time for relaxations, for pranayamas, for meditation, etc. And then you can get specific in terms of if you're practicing, if you're working on particular asanas, you want to master particular asanas, if you're working on particular relaxation and pratyahara practices, pranayamas, meditation, japa, etc. You can give yourself in your daily schedule specific amounts of time and write down those practices that you're planning to do in that session. Right? So when you are setting up your first practice plan, think about, to start with, how much time do I have? And be realistic about that. Don't say, I have 3 hours if it's really not going to work. Much, much, much better actually to do 15 minutes of practice at the same time every day than to do 3 hours of practice one day and then nothing for a month, or 3 hours of practice every day for a week and then nothing for a month, right? You want your practice to be regular, consistent, and uninterrupted, right? And so be realistic about how much time you have, and then experiment, test. Say to yourself, okay, this much time, very realistic amount of time for you, and then see how it goes. Make the details of your practice plan, follow through, experiment. See after 3 weeks how it's going. Were you able to do it every day? Were there obstacles? Were there challenges that you didn't foresee? Almost certainly there will be. If not, beautiful, carry on. Once you feel that this is easy, I want to do a bit more, add a bit more time. And having added a bit more time, you can do a longer meditation, you can do a longer series of pranayama practices, you can do a longer relaxation, you can do more asanas or longer period of time in a few asanas. So choose carefully how to spend that time that you've given yourself, okay? So make your one specific time in the day for practice the center and the anchor of your entire schedule. And in many cases, just one time in the day is enough, certainly in terms of a beginning, right? But if you find that you have other periods in the day where you could set aside some time specifically for practice, then you can utilize those. And this can be very helpful and a very powerful way actually to just add momentum to your overall practice. So adding additional times of meditation in the day. You have your one fixed time at a specific time wherever you've made it. For example, my fixed time of meditation is early in the morning. That was the fixed time in the ashram of my master where I lived for almost 10 years in Rishikesh. That was a fixed time of meditation in the morning, and so that's my fixed time of meditation. But it's also beautiful to be able to sit before going to bed in the evening, so I love to do that. And so if you find that you have more than one time in the day where you can say, I'm going to go into my practice at that time as well, then utilize that. So keep your one fixed time and then expand it as you can, as you realistically can. So sitting in the morning for meditation and in the evening for meditation is a very traditional and very helpful way of practice. So if you can do that in your life, then I definitely recommend it. It's a very, very good way of practicing. If you can sit more times in the day, do so. And also have in mind that you don't necessarily have to sit for a very long period of time. If you can sit for as much time as you can in your one fixed time, whether it's morning or evening, beautiful. Sit for 20 minutes, 30 minutes, 1 hour, 2 hours, fantastic. Make that your main time in the day to go into the deepest meditation experience that you can. And then if there is another time in the day, for example, for me in the evening, my second meditation isn't always as long as the morning meditation. Sometimes it is. Sometimes because of family duties, other things that I had to attend to, or I have to attend to later on, it's a bit shorter. So if you're making your schedule with multiple times in the day to sit, then you can also sit for shorter periods of time for some of those, right? In fact, just the 2 to 3 minute meditation many times in the day is one of the very powerful secrets of developing your meditation practice. So utilize that. So then multiple times in the day, potentially for your meditation, according to how it fits into your life. Also, it's very traditional that if you can sit and do your breathing practices, your pranayama practices multiple times in the day, then it will add power and momentum to those practices. So do that according to your capacity in those practices themselves. So you don't want to do too much too fast, but also do those according to your life and your responsibilities and your daily schedule. So what's the schedule that we used to follow when I was in the Gurukulam of the ashram in Rishikesh? We would practice pranayamas 3 times a day at specific times. So early in the morning before meditation, then in the afternoon before lunch, and then in the evening before the evening meditation and before dinner. So those were the 3 times. Some people who are really into pranayama practices would even add an additional 1 or 2, so increase it out to 4 times a day, or in some rare cases even 5 times a day. Now these are traditional formats of pranayama practice in yoga. 3 times a day is very good. Once a day, every day is good. Twice a day, even better. 3 times a day, fantastic. More than 3 times a day, very intense. So use the time that you have, particularly for pranayama practices. If you're intending to practice multiple times in the day, then what you'll notice immediately is you get very specific about how much you eat and when you eat. Because for all of these practices, the amount of food that you take and how long after taking food you practice are very important elements. Some of the practices you shouldn't do unless you've had 3 to 4 hours minimum after taking food. Other ones, like Nadi Shodhanam, you can do at any time, but they do work better and they do produce a more beautiful effect if you're not practicing with a full stomach. Right, so if you're going into doing a lot of pranayama practices many times in the day, you'll get very specific about when you eat. So that's something that you can put into your schedule according to your life, according to how much time you have, right? Then physical practices. What I've found with most practitioners that I've met is usually practicing once in the day is enough, whether it's morning or afternoon, although practicing twice in the day can give you a really big boost as well if you're wanting to intensify your practice of some certain physical practices to really be very effective in a certain period of time. So you can also practice the physical practices more than once a day, depending on your time, again. So a final point about specific practices, which I haven't mentioned yet, which is practice of Svadhyaya, or the study of the scriptures. Actually, Svadhyaya in the system of Ashtanga Yoga and also Kriya Yoga means many different things. The primary meaning is actually japa, or repetition of the name of divinity. So that really fits into the category of internal practices, meditation practices, etc. But also study of the scriptures, study of the lab books of the meditators, the lab books of the yogis and the practitioners, and the maps that they have created out of compassion to help other practitioners can be very, very inspiring and helpful and clarifying in terms of your experience in your practice. So that's something also really helpful to make a little bit of time for every day. It doesn't immediately occur in my mind because I spend so much of my day usually engaging with scriptures, reading and editing and writing, etc., as part of one of my roles, one of my jobs, you can say. So that's something that I do every day anyway. but it can be very, very helpful to set yourself a specific text that you'd like to study, like the Yoga Sutras, or the Bhagavad Gita, or the Hatha Yoga Pradipika, etc. There are so many beautiful and inspiring and helpful texts in the tradition of yoga, not to mention all of the religious meditative traditions. So study of the Bible, study of the Buddhist scriptures, the Vishuddhimagga, etc. So taking up according to your tradition, according to your path, the Sankalpa, to study, to read even just a small portion of a text that you would like to study for the purpose of inspiration and also the purpose of guiding your practice, guiding your life in a spiritual direction, and guiding yourself in your meditation is really a good idea and very helpful. So consider adding that to your practice time. You may want to divide that if you've got a specific time where you're doing all of your other practices, physical practices, relaxations, breathing practices, meditation, etc., whatever combination you're using. You may want to add it to that time, or you may want to go into that practice of svadhyaya, studying the scriptures, at a different time. For example, my main practice of meditation and many other practices is early in the morning. But I love to sit for a short period of time in the evening and read a specific text that I'm working on. And also for a short period of time in the morning before I start my usual daily work, my actual employment. Just even 5 to 10 minutes. If you've got an hour to sit and study, beautiful, but even 5 to 10 minutes can be very helpful if you do it every day. You'll be amazed at the level of progress that you make over time just by being consistent. Okay, so consider adding that to your practice schedule as well. So now, final point on making your practice schedule and following your practice schedule is keep in mind the yamas and niyamas, particularly ahimsa, non-violence. I say this because when we get enthusiastic about our practice and start to expand our practice and slowly increase the amount of time and energy that we're putting into it, we can get overly enthusiastic or even overly rigid, overly disciplined, and regimented about what we're doing. So if you start to find yourself going into that mindset of getting very rigid, very regimented in what you're doing, and you're not so much enjoying it anymore, it's really creating a painful experience in your life. You're pushing yourself harder than is really something that you can enjoy. Then just take a step back and look at what you're doing and just reevaluate it. Doesn't necessarily mean stop practicing, certainly doesn't mean stop practicing. It doesn't even necessarily mean that your schedule's wrong and you should stop it, but just take a step back. And I think we all need to do this from time to time. Take a step back with yourself, look at what you're doing, look at your schedule, see with what attitude you're doing it, how hard you're pushing yourself, if you are pushing yourself. And see if you can adjust your attitude to be an attitude of enjoyment rather than an attitude of discipline. Something that I read in the Yoga Sutras relatively recently, commentary on the Yoga Sutras by Swami Veda, which I'm hoping to do a series of videos on at some stage. Swami Veda mentioned, I can't remember which sutra it was, but I'll mention it later if and when I do that series of videos, which I hope to, which was up to a certain level of experience in meditation. All of the sadhana, all of the yoga practices are really for causing your mind to become more sattvic, which means really your whole personality to become more sattvic. Right, so what does that mean for anyone who's not familiar with the three gunas of Prakriti, Sattva, Rajas, and Tamas? So Sattva guna is the quality of light. It's also the quality of joy and also enjoyment. Rajas is the quality of action and also pain. And Tamas, the quality of darkness and inertia and unconsciousness. So really up to a certain very high experience in meditation, all of the practices of yoga are designed to cause your whole personality, your whole mind to become more and more and more sattvic. So just have that in mind. It's something helpful for me, being somebody who can be very disciplined, sometimes overly disciplined and overly regimented when it comes to discipline. Keeping in mind that really, if my mind is becoming more sattvic, if my practice is having the desired effect, I'm going to become more joyful and really be enjoying that process of practice more and more. So if it's becoming a painful experience, if it's becoming a burden, doesn't mean stop, but it can be very helpful to take a step back, look at the attitude that you're doing it with, look at the schedule, see if it isn't too much for you or if it can be rearranged slightly, and making a fresh start with a new mindset. Okay, so that means the attitude of ahimsa, non-violence to yourself. It also means that your practice should not become an obstacle for those around you, right? So really, one of the main purposes of life, of being part of the world, is relationships. We all have relationships. Even if you're sitting in a remote cave in the Himalayas, if somebody is bringing you food to sustain your body, you have at least some level of relationships, right? So part of your meditation practice, part of your spiritual practice is always the sattvic and non-violent care of those relationships. So when you're setting about making your practice plan, and when you're adjusting your practice plan and building on it over a period of time, as you get more and more enthusiastic and happy about growing in your practice, then keep in mind your relationships and keep in mind to make that practice something that adds beauty to your relationships rather than becoming an obstacle in your relationships. So very, very important point for anyone who's going into sadhana, going into meditation and spiritual practice very seriously. Let it be something that improves your relationships rather than anything that harms or is an obstacle there. Okay, so that just requires care, requires understanding, and requires, in some cases, very careful and sensitive balancing act. So take care with that and give it its proper priority, because it is a very important aspect of life and aspect of your practice. Okay, so that was the short video on your daily schedule for your meditation and spiritual practice. Hope it was helpful, and wish you a beautiful, uninterrupted, unbroken stream of spiritual practice, stream of regular meditations, really leading you into deeper stillness and joyful experiences in your meditations. Thanks very much, and see you next time.